Hey, y'all, it's Michelle with SLP Full Disclosure. Welcome back to today's episode. Today, we have, and I know, again, I say this every single episode, we have a very special guest. But today is the absolutely most special guest of them all. Today, we are joined by my daughter, Mia Gage. Mia, thank you so much for joining us today. Let me tell you guys a little bit. I know you're probably thinking, what is Mia a speech pathologist? What does she do? Mia is not a speech-language pathologist. Mia is a middle school math teacher. So I know everybody's like, all right, this is a speech pathology podcast. Why do we have a math teacher on? And the reason I had Mia on the show is because she and I have had many conversations about her profession as a math teacher. She knows what I do as a speech-language pathologist. And one night, Mia, how many glasses of champagne had we had? We had had a couple, and we started talking about the language piece of math. And it started this really long conversation that we've actually had multiple times. And I thought, Mia, I'm going to have you on the podcast. So I twisted her arm and I made her come and join us today. Let me tell you guys a little bit about Mia, other than being my beautiful daughter that I'm so proud of. So I'm just going to read her bio. Mia is a 2022 graduate of the University of Mississippi, where she received a Bachelor of Arts in Education with a focus in secondary mathematics. While attending Ole Miss, Mia was an active member of the Kappa Delta Alpha Mu sorority, Teachers of Tomorrow, the National Education Association, Mississippi Association of Education, and the National Honor Society for Leadership and Success. Mia also served as an education ambassador for the University of Mississippi School of Education and was a co-presenter at the Mississippi Council for Teachers of Mathematics Conference. Mia was named as Oxford Middle School Employee of the Year for 23-24 and was the recipient of the Elevating Excellence Pin by the Oxford School District in August of 2024. In her current role, Mia serves as PLC leader for the 8th grade math department. She is a mentor teacher for a first-year teacher, and she is a clinical instructor for a senior teaching fellow for the University of Mississippi. Mia enjoys being active in her school as the assistant coach for the middle school cheerleading team and sponsor for the Oxford Middle School Diamond Dolls for the baseball team. In her spare time, Mia enjoys traveling, listening to true crime podcasts, and spending time with family and friends. So that's a little bit about Mia. So as you guys can hear that, she is just in her 3rd year of being a math teacher in the public school. So she is very new to the profession, but she's got lots of accomplishments. And Mia, I'm so proud of you.
Thanks, Mom.
You're welcome. All right. So Mia, let's get started. Let's talk about math. Let's talk about language, and let's talk about how that language impacts math, because I know you guys are wondering how we're going to all bring all of this together, but I promise it's going to be a good one, and I want you guys to stick around and listen. So the first question I have for you, Mia, are you ready? I know this is a question that every speech pathologist that is listening to this podcast wants to know the answer to. What is the Pythagorean theorem?
My students are probably asking the same thing right now. It is where you can take a right triangle and you can find the distance between the two sides of the triangle. You can find the distance between. So in layman's term, that diagonal of the right triangle, you can find the distance or how long it is. And it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Just a mathematical formula.
And that's what Mia likes to talk about, numbers and math. And let me tell you guys, she did not get that from me. Did you?
I did not.
No. So it's funny, we were putting up curtains in her bedroom not long ago, just like last year.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to figure out like the distance like between the window and the wall and the ceiling. We had the length of the curtains. We had all this stuff. And she busts out, and didn't you use the Pythagorean theorem?
Theorem to find the distance between the hole and the corner of the window.
Yes. And I was like, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Right? So yeah, believe it or not, contrary to popular belief, you can use the Pythagorean theorem in everyday life. So, and you can use it to hang your curtains and make them even. All right. So Mia started in the classroom, like I said, just 3 years ago. This is her 3rd year. The first question I have, Mia, as a middle school math teacher, What have you noticed in that middle school classroom about the language skills and how they impact a student's ability to grasp the concepts that you're teaching?
I think overall is where the vocabulary comes into play. There's so many words that start to be incorporated in 6th and 7th grade. And once you get into Algebra 1, you have to know what those words mean. But those words, that vocabulary is also integrated into their English classes, and it's in their science classes. And so they might have one meaning to it in English or in science, but then when they come to my classroom, it means something completely different. And so they're having to navigate what all those terms mean, not only in the classroom, but also when they go outside, right? Those words that we use in the classrooms mean something different in the real world. When we go out and we're talking about driving a car, going to a bank, or just shopping online, all of those things. It's just the knowledge and the understanding of what do these words mean in this moment in this classroom.
Right. Because when I think of math, I've primarily worked in elementary school. I have worked in a high school, but when I think of math, I think of manipulating numbers. So at what point in a child's education does that math kind of make that switch from manipulating numbers and being more numerical based to a more language based? What grade and what age does that happen?
Usually starts in 6th grade, with the biggest standard being mean, median, mode, range. That's when those vocabulary terms are introduced. And then you get into 7th grade and you're talking about percents and deviation. And then you get into 8th grade and you're talking about translating an image or the Pythagorean theorem or the length and the sides and that kind of terms. And then you get into algebra and you're talking about graphs and quadratics and
wow. Big words, big math words. And, the first time that you and I had this conversation, Mia, I remember telling you, and I've been a speech pathologist for 25 years, and I don't think a math teacher has ever come to me and said, hey, Michelle, when you're in speech with these kids, I know you said 6th grade, but maybe probably even late 5th grade, that vocabulary starts to really be a big part of what they're doing in math. But I've never had a math teacher come to me. So as speech pathologists, when we talk about language delays, and this is what I was explaining to Mia, it's like you said earlier, it's typically around that English, and it's, verbs and adjectives and, the subjects and the, being able to know the main idea, making inferences, drawing conclusions. That's what we think about. And yes, language does impact that. So a child that has a language delay, it's going to impact their ability to do those things, reading it, the reading comprehension, and using that text. But I've never in my 25-year career thought, how is it impacting math? Because like you said, those words can sometimes mean different things. And I think one of the words we talked about, we'll talk about that in a minute, was translation, right? So that was a big one. And I think that was the primary focus of our 45-minute conversation the night that we first started talking about that. So Mia, what are some of the standards that you teach at the middle school level? And I only ask this question because I want the speech pathologists that are listening to hear how difficult, because I know with my extensive background and my experience, I know kind of the English language arts standards, and I know, kind of what they are, and I've heard them, I've read them. I don't know that I could state them and name them, but I ask this because I want you guys to listen at when these kids get into middle school, how difficult, or for me, because I'm terrible at math, how hard these standards are that 12 and 13-year-old kids are learning. So what are some of those standards? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
can you name one like off the top of your head that you know is a language-based standard?
Transformations for sure is a big one. It's one of the biggest ones that an 8th grade student kind of learns. It's really big on a state test. Volume is really big. Pythagorean theorem is another one. Systems of equations, solving multi-step equations with variables on both sides, integrating inequalities, so that greater than, less than, that aspect. Statistics, looking at dot plots and two-way tables.
You just heard listen to that vocabulary that she's just spitting out. think about those target terms, that target language and that target vocabulary. And for our kids that we know as speech pathologists have weaknesses or even delays, like severe delays in language, you can see how they may have been doing really well in math in early elementary school because they can manipulate those numbers. But then when they get into fifth grade, especially sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, their math starts to plummet. And we're like, wait a minute, they've always been good in math. But this is why. It's because that those math concepts are now more language based. So with all those words, translation, volume, scatter plot, what else did you say?
Two-way table, equations, inequalities.
Inequalities. So just are there standards that you teach that, like, as soon as you present it, like the first day, you're like, okay, we're doing a vocabulary lesson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which ones are those?
Transformations, volume, and scatter plots data. But the biggest one is transformations for sure.
And how many vocabulary words would you say there are?
In that unit, 10.
So 10 vocabulary words that they have to know.
Yeah.
They have to be able to read them. They have to know what they mean, and they have to be able to implement them to
the math problem. Yeah.
To do the math problem. Now, you had one of the things that we talked about was the words. Oh, excuse me. That one of the things that we talked about was the words can sometimes mean something different in one situation or in one setting than what they mean in math class. And I think one of the words that we talked about was the word translate. And I know we've talked about translations. So for me and for the majority of kids at this age, when they hear translate, they think translate a language. We change a language. You had said something about that word may mean something different elsewhere. Explain to me what that means.
So with translation, there's so many different avenues that we can go down. And before I start this unit, I always ask my students, where have you heard this word, right? Outside of this math class, if we were just, walking on the square and I said, hey, translate, what would you tell me, right? And so they always go straight to, oh, I'm translating a language. But then if I were to ask them what the word translate means in science, they would talk about tectonic plates translating and moving against each other. But then when I ask them to translate something in math, I want them to take a geometric figure, a shape, and I want them to slide it left, right, up, or down on a coordinate plane. So meaning something completely different in my classroom than what they hear walking down the street or in science class.
So they see that word, they read it, and they're like, okay, translation, I know what that means. I'm going to change it. But they're not changing it.
They're not changing the shape at all in my class. No part is changing to something different.
Wow. So what do you think the biggest challenge? So how many kids have you had in your classrooms that have had IEPs? I know you've only been teaching 3 years, but how many kids have you had? And I know all of our speechies out there know that the first year teacher, the second year teacher, the newbies are going to be the ones. And I told you this going in, didn't I? I was like, you're going to be the one that's going to draw the short stick because you're going to be the teacher that they're like, okay, hey, we've got a new teacher. Let's bring her into all of these IEP meetings. And I remember how nervous you were when you went into that first IEP meeting and you asked me, what are we going to talk about? What are they going to ask me? What do I need to know? How many kids have you had that have had IEPs?
Over my 3 years, I would say about 45-ish. Because I had that inclusion class.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about
inclusion classes that were, a 49-51 split maybe. So I had 2 inclusion classrooms, and then I had one that wasn't necessarily an inclusion classroom my first year, but should have been. And then I've got a good handful this year. So, but over my 3 years, you have to remember I have 5 blocks. And so I have over 110 students every year that I have throughout the year.
Okay.
So that number might seem big, but over 3 years with 5 blocks and 100 kids to look over, that number is...
I'm going to be honest. I didn't think it was that many. I didn't think it was in the 40s. And when you get those IEPs, are they typically kids that are receiving speech-only services? How many kids have you had that are speech-only? Not many at the
No,
middle
not
school
many
level,
at
right?
middle school. I think
Mhm,
maybe 5 or 6.
mhm, and those were typically articulation,
Yeah.
just how they're saying their sounds, okay.
Mhm.
So as speech pathologists, I know that our goal is, the reason that kids get into speech services is to remediate where their weaknesses are, whether it's language or whether it's articulation, and then get them in, get them caught up so that we can get them back in that general education classroom for all the day, all the time. So they're not being pulled out and they're not missing class. But then once they get into that late elementary school and they start making that transition into middle school, the IEP team takes a really close look at those kids. So I can assure you that those 40-something kids that you've seen over the course of your 3-year career were kids who had definite weaknesses. And they're not, and you're right, they're at that level, at the middle school level, they're not going to typically be speech only, which means they've got weaknesses and they've got supports in other areas. And you also work with students who don't speak English,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
we've had that conversation. Tell me about that. How do you feel like those kids who are receiving what is it?
EL services.
EL services. I know it's called a little bit different. It's got a different terminology in every state, but in Mississippi, they call it EL, which is an English learner. Is
Mhm.
that what that stands for? Okay. So how does that language, because I know that's one of the questions you had for me. Well, I've also got kids that can't speak English. So how does that impact your learning and your teaching of these standards?
It definitely opened my eyes to a new avenue of learning. English is my first language, so I've never kind of had that struggle as
Mhm.
most students have that are EL students. But I work really close with our EL teacher, and
Mhm.
we have come up with a great beginning of the year plan.
Uh-huh.
We check in every semester. Our biggest thing at the very beginning is to kind of make those students feel like they're just like everybody else. And so
Mhm.
give out my meet the teacher, I translate my meet the teacher in their language so that they can feel like, oh, well, I'm being welcomed and she's trying to understand me. Because one thing we want is for those students to feel like they're being welcomed in our classrooms, whether it's
Right.
math, English, PE, ceramics. We want them to feel included. And so one way for them to feel included is for me to introduce myself in their native language, makes them think like, oh, she's invested in me. She's
Right.
wants me to do well. And then from there, we kind of work together on translating the notes, getting that vocabulary to them in their translated language. This time of year, we're trying to kind of ease back on that. So we're still giving them translated things, but we're wanting them to work more towards that English vocabulary. So they'll get vocabulary words translated to them, and their notes will be in English. Whereas at the beginning of the year, everything was translated for them.
Right. Can you remember? I know you and I talked about, we talked to Genesis one night. You remember the night that we talked to Genesis? What were some of those words? So, Genesis is a parafacilitator that I worked with in California, and she is bilingual. And you and I of course, we were talking about this topic about the language and the vocabulary and how it impacts. And what were some of those Spanish words that when we called her, I can't remember any of them off the top of my head, that we were like, okay, even when you translate it from English to Spanish, when those kids who are primarily Spanish speakers, it means something different than what you're trying to teach them in math.
One of them was inequality, or another one was transformation, what it means to transform something.
Transformation sounds like it's a pain in the butt. Maybe y'all should quit teaching transformations. That just sounds like that's awful. That
That's
sounds
the greatest
terrible.
thing. It is our longest unit. It's 4 weeks long, so we take our time. That word, rotation, reflection, congruency, similarity, the bulk of the vocabulary that most students usually struggle with is that transformations unit, just because it is so vocabulary based, and majority of the problems that we want them to solve are word problems where they have to manipulate what the problem is telling them to do to then do it to the figure. So that is really a heavy unit.
Do you have a lot of I know you know your speech pathologist because she calls on you to come to those meetings because they always
Yes.
have to have the gen ed teacher. And I told you, I was like, you're going to draw the short straw and you're going to be the one in those meetings. Do you have a lot of interaction with your SLP at your school, at the middle school level? Is she there every day or is she
So
at
she's split between our intermediate school, which is our 6th grade school, and the middle school, which is 7th.
Okay. So she does 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So she's working heavily with those kids in this age group that we're talking about how this language impacts them. So what kind of interactions do you have with her?
I see her every once in a while. I see her during our meetings, but most of our interactions are over email just because of, planning blocks and all of the things. We don't ever line up at the same time at the same building. So a lot of our interactions are over email, but we have great interactions.
Have you ever asked her specifically for those kids who have IEPs, hey, even for these kids, speech-only kids, this is what I want our speech pathologists to think about. So yeah, we've got speech-only kids in the middle school level, but what can we do to support that language that is so hard and so heavy? If we're providing that extra support, let's say they are still articulation only, which those are going to be few and far between at the middle school level, but they still exist. Taking those, go to your math teacher. Go to your math teacher. Get a list. Would that be helpful for you, Mia?
Yes.
Yes. So go to your math teachers, especially in that late 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, if you're working at the middle school level. And if you're still working on articulation, transformation, gosh, that's got a blend in it. It's got an R in it. It's got an F in it. I mean, it's got all kinds of stuff. So maybe we can use that vocabulary from math in our articulation therapy. And we can do that even at the elementary level, right? So we can take those vocabulary words, we can bring them into our speech sessions, and we can work on them while we're working on those speech sounds, but we can also build that language and that vocabulary for what's to come. And I think that's what's important because when they're in elementary school, like I said, they're just doing the manipulation of the numbers. What is something that you feel like would be helpful for you if you had someone like your SLP? And you said you've never gone to her and said, here's a list of vocabulary words. I need you to do that. Maybe you do that.
Yes.
Maybe you do that. Maybe the math teachers out there, go to your math teachers. And if you are a math teacher and you're listening to this, make a list of those vocabulary words. Give them to your speech pathologist because we're always looking for ways to integrate what they're doing in their classrooms in our speech sessions. I think that would be great. What would be something that they would do? Is it with that language and vocabulary, Mia, is it more memorization?
Yes and no. I think I can speak for my students that are being pulled for speech. I think right now, a lot of it is being able to self-advocate for themselves. And so they sometimes fall back in class in a sense of not knowing what questions to ask because they're struggling with that articulation aspect of it and they're not knowing how to say the words. And so then they feel embarrassed to then ask it. And middle schoolers are not the nicest.
Yeah, I will say that you got to have a tough skin. She comes home and she tells me some of the things these kids say to her. And I'm like, whoa, you got to be tough to work with middle schoolers because they'll tell you like it is.
Yes. And so I think working on that vocabulary and saying, okay, I'm struggling in math with systems of equations, but I don't know how to enunciate that or I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. So I feel like I'm falling behind because I'm not sure how to ask this question.
And a middle schooler is not going to do that. So it's going to take the SLP and the math teacher talking together and saying, hey, and sometimes they don't even know what they don't know at that age. They don't even know. Like for me, and I've told you this before, I'm terrible in math. And I wouldn't even know, like I wouldn't understand it, but I wouldn't even know how to formulate a question to ask, hey, because when they come to speech, they're not going to be working on transformations because the speech pathologists, I mean, there are probably speech pathologists out there that are really good in math and might be able to help support that. They would not get that support with me when they came to see me. I wouldn't be able to do it, but I can help that vocabulary. I can work on that vocabulary. And that's a great point, Mia, helping them know how to formulate those questions. What part do you not understand?
Right.
and helping them learn how to ask, hey,
Yeah.
I need help.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, Mia, I have learned so much from you just talking to you about your experiences as a classroom teacher, especially at the middle school level. Um, as a math teacher, what advice would you give those speech language pathologists that are working with these kiddos in late elementary, getting ready to make that transition into middle school? What advice would you give them?
Come to your gen ed teachers. We want to help just as much as you want to help. And we want these students to be successful just as much as you want them to be successful. We're always trying to learn new things. I know I can speak for myself. I always want to learn and I always want to do what's best for my students. And so just having a conversation or sitting down and saying, okay, this is what we're learning right now. Here's a list of these things would be super beneficial and it would make us feel more of a team.
Yeah. And I think that's great because, like I said, I've never thought about how language really truly impacts math. And I know, Mia, I've talked about this before, and you're very open about your diagnosis of dyslexia. And we always thought that, and I know that dyslexia did negatively impact your ability to read and that comprehension and that kind of stuff, but you were always so strong in math. But you always had a really good language foundation. So how do you feel like that dyslexia impacted you when it came to those word problems? Because I remember, when did they start doing word problems? 5th grade?
5th grade, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh God, here we go. She's going to have to read something and then do something. So how did that dyslexia impact you as a learner when you were in that early elementary age group?
Starting with math or just in general?
Yeah, especially in math.
I think for me, I was so confident numerically and I knew how to do the math. It was just breaking down the problem. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, I'm no artist, but I always draw pictures, right? I always try to draw out what's happening in the scenario so that it makes me visualize the math that I need to do, because math is so visual and it's so steps. There's like steps to go about doing it. Yeah. And so I always am like, break it down sentence by sentence. If it says something about a dog, draw a dog, right? If it says something about shooting a basketball, draw a basketball up in the air being shot into a goal as best as you can.
Right.
But breaking it down and making it more of a visual image instead of words.
Yeah. And as speech pathologists, we like our visuals. We love doing pictures and the picture symbols. And that might be something that the speech pathologists that are listening, maybe you get with your math teacher and you're like, let's just make a visual. Let's make some visuals of what a transformation is. And what were some of those other words? Reflections. Let's draw a picture and let's get a picture to represent what these words mean, to help these kids who have these language delays, to help them visualize it. I think that's great, Mia. That was awesome. Okay. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this has been a little bit different than what we typically talk about, but we also have a guest coming up in the next few weeks who does a lot of research. She's a professor here at the University of Mississippi, and she does a lot with language and literacy. So I thought that this was going to be a great episode to piggyback on with the language and the math. So thank you guys so much for joining us, Mia. It has been a pleasure, and you are more than welcome to come back anytime. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you guys have a great day, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to SLP Full Disclosure. You can learn more about this episode and our show on our website at amnhealthcare.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find show updates and SLP opportunities on our Instagram at AMN Allied. Special thanks to AMN Healthcare for making this show possible. See y'all next time.